streaming. So today we start our study in the book of Romans, or the letter of Romans, and you guys did such a great job working on Revelation and getting that down. We just thought we'd take the next hardest one in order and run through that. No, Romans is a vital book, and it happens to be Peter's longest letter. And if you've ever wondered about how the New Testament got laid out when they started doing the epistles, they just started with the longest one of Peter's first, Paul's first, and I'm liable to do that 100 times, and then went to the second longest, and so forth. It wasn't really done in chronological order. So I'm going to ask a question that's not in the workbook, and if anybody hadn't gotten the workbook, there should be plenty back on the podiums out in the auditorium or in the lobby. What's the maybe some one-word answers or two-word answers, and we've got mics. John and Jonathan are running the mics this morning, so anything longer than a couple of words, let's get them on the live stream. So when you think of Romans, give me a short sentence or a word or something that what pops in your mind. This is an association drill here. I say Romans, and you say faith. Someone said. I think that was Brandon. So, gospel. Linda. Running Linda and Kendrick together. Okay. Righteousness. Okay. All right. Those are all great answers. Anybody else weigh in before we move on? One of the phrases that I want you to think of, much like Revelation, there's a phrase in the first and last chapter of the book of Revelation. And it's soon. I mean, that's the word that we get from Revelation. But there's also a phrase in Romans, in the first and last chapter of Romans. Romans 1 and Romans 16 has this exact same phrase, and it's called the obedience of faith. The obedience of faith. I want that to start filtering into our heads at this point, and be thinking about, as we roll through Romans here, what is Paul trying to tell us? Because he tells us here very early on that his mission in life is to bring about the obedience of faith. Okay. So I want to do a little bit. Who all got a chance to read the intro to the? Okay, several. I think it's worth repeating, so I'll repeat it here. We're at a unique geographical. We're at a unique point in time. One of the things that I think we've missed in our study of Romans in the past, at least I know I have in my lifetime, is just the setting that is going on. So we find out that in Acts, and we get some allusion to that in Corinthian letter as well, that the Caesar before Nero, Claudius, has told all the Jews to get out of Rome. And he got them out. And it would be relatively easy to get the Jews out of Rome. And why would that be? They look different. How hard would it be to go to New York and round up all the Hasidic Jews? Easy. Easy. I mean, you there with the beard. You there with the black clothing. You with the and all the other, and I'm not making fun. I'm just saying that I'm serious. I'm not making fun. That's their culture, and I respect that. But it would be easy. However, think about this. What about Greeks? What about Romans living in the Roman Empire who became Christian? Did Jesus institute a way of eating, or a manner of dress, or a manner of So how would they be distinguished just by looking at them? It'd be hard for the emperor to run them out. And then when we get to the chapter 16, we'll see he'll give a bunch of names, and some people have extrapolated from those names and the house groups that are there that there was probably 100 on the Christians living in Rome that were Greek that he refers to, and so it wasn't a huge group of people to start with. So it'd be very difficult to find 100 people who looked like everybody else and that sort of. So anyhow, that we went too far with that. But what has happened is that Nero has relaxed that, and the Jews have gone back to Rome. Now imagine all the church groups in Rome, and there's more than one group. There's not one church building with a sign up. There's a lot of house churches in the city of Rome. And so the Jews are coming back, and imagine what happens now that they haven't been there and they haven't had interaction for years, and they've been chased off and whatnot. So, and the Gentiles have been, to use our phrase, they've been running things now for a few years. Could there be tension? Yeah. I mean, they were human, just like we're human. So that sort of thing, if it's allowed to fester, could do what to the church? It could really damage its credibility and damage its witness. It could destroy parts of it, and it could destroy the faith of some. So there's a lot in this book that's pointing in that direction as we go through. So there was one other thing I wanted to make sure we got early on in this, and that is the last paragraph. I wanted to make sure where it was at, but just that. Well, our purpose, our mission behind studying Romans is so that we might live out the obedience of faith. That's really our purpose for Chelsea studying this. It was the book that it was Luther's favorite letter. By Luther, I mean Martin Luther. It was his absolute favorite letter, and it's what he used to defend his theses against the Catholic Church. Of course, he didn't need a lot of ammunition at the time because it was corrupt, but that was his go-to. Today, we might think of using this to counter the thoughts of Calvin. And I'm not saying any of those are not worthy goals of themselves, but that's not the primary goal of what we're doing with the book of Romans. We want to understand what the obedience of faith looks like in our lives, and we're going to get to that topic for sure, Lord willing, if we get to finish this quarter on this side of eternity. So let's take a look at section 1, question 1. And we're going to start at the most logical place. We're going to start at the beginning, start with the salutation. And someone tell me, what's the same? Paul's got 13 letters. I don't believe Paul wrote Hebrews. It doesn't read like Paul. There's just a lot of indicators that it's not Paul from my vantage point, but I wouldn't debate anybody over that. But all 13 of Paul's letters have a common signature at the very beginning. The way he addresses his letters. If you read through the 13, it's going to just jump out there right off the page at you. What's identical to his other salutations? We got runners. Hang on just a second. Let's get a map. Let's get a mic to Brandon.
I think you're referring to what's in verse 7. Grace and peace to you through Jesus Christ.
Okay, that is certainly the big one that jumps off the page. There's another. Gina's got. Okay, yeah. Paul, an apostle, is pretty common. I didn't go back and look at all 13 to make sure, but that is a very common. He will say in some to the church at Here he says to the Romans, okay, so he gives his audience. We won't get into the whole Ephesians thing, how that's, never mind. We won't, like I said, we won't get into the whole Ephesians thing. So those are the common things. There's another thing that he will usually always mention the Father and the Son, and sometimes he will mention the Father, the Son, and the Spirit in his salutation. But here's a difference. Here's a notable difference. This is his longest salutation. A lot of the others are 1 or 2 verses. He says, Paul, an apostle of God, through Christ Jesus, to the saints at so-and-so, grace and peace. And that would be a normal salutation. But this one, he does something different. I got some thoughts on the differences here. Okay, get Denise a mic, please, John. Thank you.
He goes into his purpose to preach the gospel.
Okay, all right. He delves into his mission. That's unique. Anybody kind of pick up? He gives us a lot of the gospel message right here in the very beginning. He lays it out. Talks about Jesus being Lord, which means sometimes ancient culture using the ancient word would get it a little quicker than we would get it. What that means is king. He's sovereign over your life. The second thing that he does here, talks about the resurrection. That's unique. Brandon?
He's almost laying out for the Jews, this is your Messiah, just as is written in the Old Testament. You know, this is your proclaimed king. Mm-hmm. Here he is. Mm-hmm. You know, this is who you've been looking for. This is Jesus.
And we want to circle back to this. Just because Nero has relaxed this, let me flip back to my notes because I think it was 54, but I don't know for sure. Nero in 54 reverses Claudius's ban against Jews. If you're a Jew and you've been gone for years and you had a business going in some other city, you might be compelled to go back. You might not be compelled to go back. You know, I mean, it's not instant that. But he starts off first. He tells in his mission here, who's he going to go to? Who is Paul going to go to with his message? Primarily non-Jews. I mean, he's the apostle to the Gentiles. And here's another way. Okay, so the Jews were pretty how they described it is you were either Hebrew or you were Gentile. That was their two designators. But if you were not Jewish and you lived in Roman society, then there were other stratas of people out there. So the Greeks you call somebody a Greek and they would be proud of that term because the Greek culture was the pinnacle of art and literature and philosophy and sport and all these other things. They were the pinnacle. So you were that. Then they had others, barbarians, someone who wasn't an educated person and someone who came from a non-Greek speaking area, and they had that. And so Paul will allude to all those. He'll allude to it from a Roman viewpoint, and he'll allude to it from a Jewish viewpoint when he talks about people. And so that sometimes that gets us a little confused because we don't see the news of that day. We see the news of our day. But that's just the way they talked about. That's the way they stratified people. So in the salutation, he talks about Jesus in a specific way, and how might that description of Jesus undermine the view of Caesar? Verse 4, okay. Miss Linda. John, would you get a mic to Miss Linda. Tell us what verse 4 tells us.
He was declared to be the Son of God with power
Okay.
and in the holiness of the Spirit.
All right. All right. And let's focus on that first word, the Son of God. Not a Son of God, the Son of God. There's another thing that's it's more subtle, and it's an earlier verse, and I didn't catch it till this time around, and it wasn't that I caught it. I read a commentary and got to this point. He talks about through the lineage of David. Now, the Greeks were not uneducated people, and the Romans were not uneducated because they aspired to be more Greek-like in their culture, more sophisticated and more urbane and worldly and knowledgeable and all these type of things. They would have known the name David, just like they would have known the name Nebuchadnezzar. They would have known the name of Alexander the Great. They would have known the history. And so what Paul is saying is that Jesus is from a more ancient lineage, King David, than the Caesars, because the Caesars only go back to about 60 or 70 BC. So you're just a pup. You're just a newcomer. Jesus' lineages goes all the way back 1,000 years. That's impressive to a Roman. I mean, a Roman would see the difference between Caesar and Jesus in that statement. And the other thing that he talks about is, and what none of the Roman Caesars claimed, they didn't claim the ability to rise from the dead. And so the Son of God with power, not military power, but power of the resurrection, and that his kingship goes back over 1,000 years. And they go, oh, well, this guy really fits the king status as opposed to Caesar. Now, would that be something that Caesar would want to hear? No. I can imagine that Caesar would read this first paragraph. I doubt that he did. I doubt Nero read this first paragraph and go, those 100 or so poor folks living down by the river Tiber, who put up with the floods and the mosquitoes and everything else that goes on in that area, and I'm living up here on the hill. What kind of king is that? You know, what kind of lifestyle can he offer? Little did he know that the days of the Caesars would end, but that Jesus' reign, Jesus' kingdom would never end. Okay. Section 2. So what's Paul's section 2 of this is a prayer, and what's the prayer about? The first attribute of the saints that are living there in Rome. You see, faith. Okay, and notice that the way Paul prays this is that he's thankful to God that they exist, that they're there. And we're going to get this because Paul is going to talk about his mission and his desire, specifically in chapter 15, where he's going to get to the point where he's going to talk about going there. But he does talk about going there in this chapter and what he wants to do. But what does he ask for when he talks about their faith? Also in verse 6, he says he calls them the chosen or the called by Jesus. We'll get to that concept shortly here. But what does he ask for daily in his prayers? Okay, Scott needs a mic.
He's praying that he can finally come to them, succeed in being able to come to them.
Okay. And then while he's there, what is he praying for? This prayer goes on to, when I'm with you, I want to accomplish something. Is that okay? All right. Impart a spiritual gift. And So this gets into the next question. Why does he want to do this? What's his purpose for wanting to give these folks a spiritual gift? Pardon? To strengthen them. And notice what he says. Would it just strengthen the folks living in Rome? No. Chuck shakes his head no.
It says that they would be mutually encouraged. They would help each other.
It would build even Paul up. Isn't that astonishing? Paul knows he has this ability, but when he sees faith growing in the life of someone else, and these folks, he's not responsible for their conversion to Jesus. He's pretty candid. I've wanted to come there, and God has kept me from coming there up to this point. So he's not responsible for their conversion. Somebody else is. But when he sees their growth through the spiritual gift that God has given him to pass along, then it's going to build him up. And I think sometimes when we see these heroes of faith like Paul and Peter, we think we put them at a plane that we just can't attain that plane. And then we really look at their lives and they go, if I could just get there and see you and do this for you, what God has given me the ability to do, then it would build my faith. It would lift me up, and as well as lift you up. I just find that absolutely fascinating. Well, let's we're going to stop right here because we'll do little nuggets along the way. I want us to understand the meaning of this word called, and we're going to take a look at that in the first chapter here. Verse 6, we're backing up a little bit, including you who are called to belong to Jesus Christ. That's a word that's bedrock in the Reformed theology. Here's what the actual word means. The Greek word is kletos, and it means invited. It means invited. So if, for instance, we had sufficient parking, that's what kills us, is if we had enough parking, we'd say, everybody come to our house for lunch today. And I just didn't invite everybody to our, because we got nothing ready. If you want to eat oak leaves, then come on over to the house. We got nothing prepared. But so you could say, I was chosen by Joe and Karen to come to the house. That would be an accurate way of using this word, invited to my house. And that's simply what that's the simplest and the first definition for chosen or called. And so let's keep that, put that nugget in our head as we go forward here. We don't want to overlook the fact that during all of our study here, that God is sovereign. We're not ever going to back off that concept. We're going to get more deeply into what that means. And I just answered D. So who controlled whether or not Paul went to Rome? Okay, God, yeah. It's like, Joe, you already said it. Why do you make us say it again? No, I want us to get this. God is in control of whether or not Paul goes. And that's where Paul placed. He said, I've been prohibited. I've been hindered. There have been things, and he assigns that to God. And so, without going too much further down that trail, I want us to keep in mind that verse 6 talks about a calling, which means an invitation. But Paul does talk about God's will in our lives, and there are things that he decides for us, as the book of James will even tell us that, do not say that I'm going to go to such and such a city for a year and buy and sell and get gain. And I'm thinking it's chapter 5 or It's one of the last two chapters of James. I just can't pull it up. Can't pull it up in my brain at this point. But he says, if God wills, if it's God's will, then yeah, that'll happen. But if it's not, that's not going to happen. And so we'll always should keep that in mind. And not that we could ever say that I'm planning on going to Florida this month. I am planning on going to Florida this month. It's not a sin to say that and not say if the Lord wills. It's not a magical phrase. We should always just understand that that's God's will does act within our lives. So in this first section, Paul mentions the gospel 3 times. He mentions this word gospel 3 times. And what is his description of this gospel? And really, from the section you can tell I'm aiming at verse 16. What's his description of this gospel?
One, it is the power of God for salvation.
Okay. So what's the definition of gospel? And I know that's a softball, but good news. Good news. So how is news powerful? Okay. I'll give a...
It says right there in the verse, it's for salvation.
Okay.
So it's the power of God for salvation.
All right. And it's for everyone. Okay. Great answers. Brandon's got some.
Well, if you just think about practically, news enlightens your thinking. If you don't know about some event that has happened, you're ignorant. And so this news can enlighten you about eternity.
Okay.
Can enlighten you about salvation. It's the best of news.
It's like this. So if I said, Brandon, I got some news for you. You and Ashley are going to have your 4th child. And Brandon faints in his seat. Well, okay, someone tells me and Karen, you're going to have we both faint. We've just... So, I mean, news is impactful, and we kind of dismiss, but here's the news that is, and he's alluded to it already earlier. This Jesus that I'm telling you about is resurrected from the dead. And the power of that, I don't want us to ever kind of get to the point that's it's huge. It's huge. How many people have known people in their lives, and maybe experienced this themselves, who their greatest fear is really death? That's the greatest fear that they have. And he says the good news is that God's going to give you the power over death, over the enemy. And you ask the question, okay, that's amazing. What did I do to earn that? What did I do to deserve that? And what's God's answer? Nothing. You didn't do anything. I created you, I loved you, and I still love you, and I want you to have this gift. I'm going to tell a family story here. It's a Christmas time story, and it's one of my nephews. I'll keep the name silent. So anyhow, Christmas time rolls around, and it's a nephew, he's a little boy, and he's at the age that these action figures are all the rage. I mean, that's what he wants more than anything in life. And it's Christmas morning, and he opens up this gift from his grandparents, and it's clothes. And what he instantly does is he burst into tears and just sobbing in the floor. Now, he's got no concept of, this is a valuable gift. This costs money. This was a thoughtful gift. He was like, he didn't want the gift. And if his parents hadn't been there, he would not have accepted the gift. So later on in life, he became a guy who liked wearing nice clothes. So his life changed later on. Maybe that Christmas morning changed everything. I don't know. But you see how that even something being a gift can be rejected. It can be given with the best of intention. It can be given with all the love in the world. But the person who is looking at the gift says, I don't want it. I don't want it. So let me ask you a question. I'm rolling back to verse 6 here. So if I've been offered, if I've been invited to partake in the freedom from the fear of death, that's been taken care of, and I reject it, does it change the value of the gift any? No, it doesn't change the value of the gift. The problem is with me. The problem is with me seeing the value of the gift and being willing to accept the gift and live out the... And so we could have taken the Christmas morning analogy further. If he had chosen to respect the gift and accept the gift, then you would expect him to wear the clothes, wouldn't you? I mean, that would be part and parcel of that whole process. Well, we won't get too far into that because we got a lot of Romans to cover here. So in this concept of good news being so powerful, and it is powerful, and it's God's power to salvation. And by salvation, I mean the restoration of our body. Jesus tells us, or Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, that we're going to get a body like Jesus' resurrected body. Ever thought of that? I mean, he tells us plainly, and I mean, not in Revelation words, in Corinthian words, to simple Corinthian folks, you're going to get a body just like Jesus, chapter 15. Well, his body was not constrained by doors, locked doors, but he also had a body he could sit down and eat with his disciples, and did on 3 occasions after the resurrection. He could also just... There he is, there he's not. And here's the other one. What about this whole ascending? How long did it take man to get to the point where we could develop the fuel, develop the technology, develop all this to beat gravity in going straight up for any significant distance? Like the 20th century, right? And still... I mean, what's North Korea still trying to do? They're still trying to figure out how to get a rocket to go further. That's not an easy process, but yet Jesus' body just ascended, defied gravity. I'm probably headed down some paths that you didn't expect this morning, but that's good news. That's incredible news. We've got and get a mic to Charlie while John's getting the mic to Charlie. Even our resident fitness guru and the guy that nobody wants to get in the ring with, no matter what their age is, Glenn, would tell you his body is not the same as it was when he was 20 years old. Now, he's closer to 20 than a lot of us because he works hard at it, but he's still got aches and pains that never existed at 20. Glenn, am I correct? Okay. Maybe too many bouts in the ring or whatever. Charlie?
Well, all of my life I've always found it interesting how much effort and how important it is that we cling to this life. I mean, we have a heavenly life that is magnificent. And I can't, I won't speak for everybody else, but I still cling to life. It's just a strange phenomenon, and I'm not sure that I can explain that. Anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, if you don't mind me wading in here at that point, I believe that's a God-given trait. We see that. Let me finish my thought here. I know you squinched up. I don't mean to the extent where we do things like I don't mean like Botox and Jack LaLanne and all that sort. That's not what I'm talking about. But even a wounded animal tries to live, and self-preservation is a gift that God gives all of His creation outside of the grass and the trees and that sort of thing. But taken to the extreme, when we don't believe in an afterlife and we see how people cling to this life and it's their only hope, I get what your point is. Sometimes our problem, and most often our problem, is our vision. We can see this life, we can smell this life, we can touch, taste, and experience this life. And the obedience of faith takes us to a place that says, God's never gone back on a promise. As a matter of fact, there was Terry was sharing with me. Terry called me. He was all excited. He'd sat through a class that is being led by a fellow who grew up Hebrew. Let's just change that phraseology. He's genetically Hebrew. He went to synagogue his early life. He converted to Christianity. He's a professor down in Florida, and he's in the process of getting his PhD. And he was putting out some information. And I shouldn't have gone into the description because I'm about to forget what it was that he said. I'm gonna lose my point right in front of you, Charlie. It's won't be the last time if the Lord gives us another. Anyhow, the point in all of this is that tell your teacher to quit building the story to the point that he misses the point. Because I have missed it. It may circle back to me later. But the obedience of faith will change the way we look at things. It will change our vision. It won't change it to where we're just willing to say at the moment, well, just take me now. Because God blessed us in this life with friendship, with family, with things that are good things. And so if our attitude becomes, if it's God's will that He take me tonight, then I'm ready, take me tonight. And but if He wants me to live tomorrow, then I'm going to glorify Him tomorrow. And that's our life. So the last one here that we look at, number C, is let's just notice how he makes this construct that will go all the way through the book of Romans, all the way into chapter 15, and also be alluded to in chapter 16. So let's just say the whole book. Jew and Gentile, Jew and Gentile, Jew and Greek, Jew and Gentile. That's going to be a major theme, and we see it right in the very beginning. And it's gonna keep, and it's important to understand this, to understand the book. If you write a book about anything other than fiction, just something for, the author has a purpose behind the book, and you can reach into chapter 3, pull out a concept, and it not be the intention of the author ever. You just yank a concept out of context, and you run with that. It's like the passage in Philippians, and I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Well, what does that got to do with football? Got absolutely nothing. Now, I mean, I would much rather a football player have a scripture on his helmet or on his jersey or on his, tattooed on his arm or whatever. I'd rather him have scripture there than to have some sort of vulgarity, for sure, or anything that's non-scriptural. But it's reaching in, grabbing a verse, and taking it out, and just twisting it where the context is completely lost. And we're going to be looking at that through Romans, that there's a context running through Romans. And I'll do a spoiler alert here. This doesn't mean everybody can't come back. Everybody, please do come back. God is going to show His absolute intention to never break covenant. Ever break covenant. And that was the point that I was going to make earlier, that God makes a promise. This was the Jewish college professor. That God never, the very definition of the word is it's something that cannot be broken. And when He makes a promise to do something, like He tells us through Paul in Corinthians 15, that I'm going to give you a body like Jesus. That's a promise. He won't break that. And so as we break down as humans and our bodies get worse and worse, we really do start valuing that body a little more, don't we? And when we deal with the pain and the persecution in this life, we look forward to a life that doesn't have pain and a life that doesn't have persecution. And we value it more, I think, and that's maybe part of the growth process of our faith as Christians. So in looking at this Jew and Gentile, he starts off in the very first salutation, David, a Hebrew, Jesus, a Hebrew, and this message is going to the nations. And that is the way that the Old Testament writers wrote about Gentiles, to the nations. And so he's saying this came through the Hebrew family, but the blessing is for all the nations. And that's a theme that's going to go all the way through Romans, and how God makes that happen. And His will will set about to mold events and mold lives and mold people to the point that God's covenant, God's promise is always kept. Even when we step in the way, when I say we, I'm talking about humans, when we step in the way to try to thwart that, God will not allow that to happen. He will continue forward, and He will be righteous, meaning He will keep His covenant despite what He has to do with Israel to make that happen. And when we start seeing the beauty of that, it's just amazing. And I'm going to take us back to Genesis 15 at some point in this study and show how God shows Abraham that He's going to hold up the covenant even when we're incapable of holding up the covenant. We've reached almost the end of our allotted time this morning. Are there any questions about the first 17 verses of chapter 1? Faith, obedience of faith, God keeping promise, Jew first, and then the nations. We start seeing these themes move through Romans. It'll enrich us and also give us greater appreciation for God's sovereignty and His love. Thank you. We're through this morning for this class.